Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel and Merry Christmas. So today we got a super cold, windy winter day, negative wind chill, and I figured, hey, what else would be better to do than go outside and smoke some barbecue. So I've got my new Hasty Bake Roughneck Smoker, also known as a Rollins Cowboy Smoke Box, and today we're going to use this to smoke a pork shoulder, make some pulled pork barbecue for Christmas Eve. And so what we'll do in this video is I'll start out showing how I fire up the smoker, how I prep the pork butt for cooking, get it on the smoker, and then go through the different stages of cooking it. It's a 6-hour cook time approximately, and so we'll look at some of the different steps along the way. And then at the end we'll come back and pull that pork butt apart for our Christmas Eve dinner. So stick around and we'll get started. But I've got the firebox loaded up with hardwood lump charcoal, got some starters down in there, a couple small pieces of hickory, and I'm gonna hopefully let this guy get established and for about 10 minutes, then close the doors and the lid, let it warm up, and then we'll get to smoking. I've got a nice stack of seasoned hickory over here. These sticks are a little bit longer than I'd probably want to use with this box, but it's so cold I'm not gonna get out a saw and chop these down, so I'll be using these full length. They should get a really nice long burn just because there's so much surface area, and they're skinny, but we'll see how those guys do. So yeah, here we are, maiden voyage of the Hasty Bake Roughneck Smoker. I'm gonna let this guy get up to heat, and then we'll go inside and prep our pork butt. Okay, so now that the smoker is on its way to warming up, we can talk about the prep. This is a 6-pound pork butt, or shoulder as it's often called, and I typically cook between a 5 and 6 pounder, just a grocery store pork butt. I like these because they're idiot proof. They contain a lot of fatty material, a lot of connective tissue, and all that breaks down to moisten the meat and help it fall apart when it's cooked. So this is a real good idiot-proof way to do some barbecue. And to be honest with you, when I do this at home, it's better than anything I've ever had in any restaurant. So, you know, that tells me it's possible for an average person to produce really good barbecue with a pork butt, following some general guidelines. So again, I usually cook between a 5 and a 6 pounder. The other idiot-proof thing about this size pork butt is that if you cook this for 6 hours at 250 Fahrenheit, it's going to be perfect. You don't have to measure temperatures. You don't have to check things. I will today because I'm using a new smoker, new to me, and it's really cold out. And I'm going to want to pull this and wrap it at a particular point in time. But just in general, 6 hours at 250, and this is just fall apart. Awesome. Pulled pork barbecue. So this is really a good idiot-proof cut of meat that produces great results for me historically. So now we can get into prepping this meat. If this is a grocery store pork butt, it's been shrink wrapped. First thing I like to do is pull it out of that wrap, rinse it off, dry it off, and then let it air out for 20-30 minutes. That lets any gases that were trapped inside of that package air out. And then I'll come over and slather this guy with yellow mustard. And the main point of the yellow mustard is to kind of create a glue or a binder for your rub. And I'm sure it adds flavor, but you know, a lot of times we control flavor by what we put in our rub and what we smoke with. But this is primarily going to be a glue for our rub, and it always works well for me. Just plain old French's yellow mustard. You don't have to get fancy with this. I'm gonna get that everywhere. And at this point, the meat's going to be ready to accept our rub. Now, there's all kinds of rub recipes. I tend to use a pretty traditional southern barbecue rub that works well. Usually has brown sugar, salt, pepper, cumin, paprika, maybe some red pepper in it. One thing I found helpful over the years is to separate out the salt and add that individually, which gives me very, very good control over how salty this is going to be at the end. So what I'm doing now is just sprinkling on some kosher salt, coarse kosher salt, and I know about, you know, the density of salt I want to season this, because really when you're doing a butt, all of your seasoning is on the outside. None of it's going to be on the inside, so you can afford to over season the outside and you know, over salt the outside a little bit, and it really is only going to enhance the flavor because you've got a lot of volume of meat here with fairly limited surface area. So you can be liberal with the outer seasoning, but I like to separate the salt so that I know that there's enough salt and I'm not dependent on the rub mix to have the salt distributed. So there's our salt. Here's some rub. This is Harold's Hog Rub. Very, very similar to the rub I make myself, but I've been using Harold's Hogwash barbecue sauce for many years, and finally decided to try his rub, and just saves me an extra step of making my own rub, and it's got a nice flavor. This is not very salty, by the way, so again, this is how keeping the salt independent lets me really control the flavor and the seasoning at the end. But that's something you're going to want to experiment with and learn over the years with your different types of rubs and seasonings. And we just want to get this everywhere we can on all the sides of pork butt. And then flip it over. You know, one thing I forgot to mention is I typically will trim a lot of the fat cap off of the top of the pork butt. A lot of people like to leave that on, thinking it melts down and moisturizes, and it does, but there's so much fat and connective tissue inside of this cut, you don't really need that cap on top. And what I found is I ended up, you know, when this is done and I'm going to pull it apart, I'll end up tearing all that fat off anyways because you don't want to eat that. And then what happens is the fat had hidden a lot of surface area of the butt that was not getting rubbed. And so I kind of figured out over the years, hey, I'll just trim that fat down. You can see there's still quite a bit left. I'd really just shave it down until I get close to the meat and start to see some pink meat poking through. And that just lets me get this rub, you know, onto more of the meat and not put it on the fat where it's not going to necessarily do me any good. So that's good for now. And I usually like to let this sit minimum of 15 minutes, let it kind of sweat and absorb some of the seasoning. It'll draw some moisture out of the meat, and then that in turn draws the seasoning in. You can let this sit for as long as 4 or 6 hours if you want. I have not detected a big difference based on the length of time I let the rub sit, but some people, you know, really think you should leave it for a couple hours. So you can do that however you want, but I'm gonna let this sit for probably 15 to 20 minutes while the smoker continues to equalize to my desired temperature. I'll be shooting for 250 Fahrenheit, but really anything between 225 and 275 is just fine. Today's a cold, windy day. It's a new smoker to me. I'll be happy, you know, anything in that 225 to 275 range as I get started. So we'll let this sit and come back when it's ready to go onto the smoker. All right, so far this has been real easy to control despite the cold weather and the wind. I'm able to keep this right near 250. I've just made minor tweaks to the vents front and back to keep me in that zone. And I imagine if the conditions weren't so challenging, it'd be a set and forget type of thing. But still got nice smoke, nice heat, good flow coming out the back there. So far so good. All right, I'm holed up here in my workshop where it's a balmy 65 degrees. Having heat in a workshop is like one of the best things ever. But I want to talk about kind of the cooking strategy for pork butt that I use. I mentioned before, pretty much 6 hours at 250, and for a 5 to 6 pound butt, and it'll be perfect. What I normally do is I run smoke for 2 to 3 hours, and usually I just let my initial smoke setup run out, and then just stop adding hickory to the smoker. But at that 2 hour mark, you should be roughly around 160, 170 degree internal temperature. And again, if you want to check that, you can, but I know it's roughly around the 2.5, 3 hour mark for me. What I'll do is turn off the smoke and then wrap the pork butt in foil. And you can either continue to cook it on your smoker at 250 or bring it inside and stick it in your oven. That can save a lot of hassle, especially if you have a day like today when it's really cold and windy outside. So I'm going to see how things are going with the smoker and the charcoal and the fuel and the wood when I start to get around the 2 hour mark. If it's still going strong, I'll just wrap the butt and leave it out there. But if it's starting to peter out, then I'll bring it inside and get it into the oven. Now, one thing I forgot to mention before is what I normally like to do is go in every hour or so while I'm still smoking the butt and rotate it, and then spritz it or swab it down with something. You can use cider vinegar, apple cider. Sometimes I use whatever I have around. So I've made up mixes of beer and barbecue sauce and put that on. And that'll really help the bark that you're developing get a little bit thicker and hold together better and not dry out so much. It's not really going to get into the meat. The internal part of the meat's got all that connective tissue and fat. There's loads of moisture inside the meat that you don't have to really worry about. It's really the bark that you're going after when you spritz this every hour. So we'll check back in around the 2 hour mark, see how things are doing, and at that point probably wrap that butt up and either continue to cook it outside without adding any more hickory, or bring it inside to the oven. All right, it's been 3 hours and 20 minutes and we just passed 170 internal temperature. And so I'm gonna take this guy now and wrap him up nice and tight in some foil. And then we're going to return this to the smoker. There's plenty of charcoal left, and it's not having any problems maintaining temperature. So I'm going to keep running this in the smoker until I start to see that temp drop off. At which point, if there's still any time remaining on the 6-hour cook time, I'll bring it into the oven. But this is pretty much the important halfway step where you don't really need to smoke anymore. You want to, wrap it up and continue to cook it. Stay tuned. The next thing we'll look at is really when we pull the pork butt out of the smoker or out of the oven, depending where it finishes up. What I normally like to do is, cook it the full 6 hours. Ideally, you want to get it to about 205 internal temperature, but you can't really overcook these things if you're just cooking, in the 250 or below range. It's really hard to overcook them. So what I normally like to do is either go to the full 6 hours or check the temperature if it's at 205, turn off the heat, and then rest the pork butt either in a cooler, in a bunch of paper bags, or if it's in the oven, just turn off the oven and let it sit for about an hour. So we'll come back after the pork butt is done cooking and it's been rested, and we're going to pull it apart to make our pulled pork barbecue.